John Moon, retired assistant chief from the city of Pittsburgh Paramedics, as well as a former Freedom House employee. During the 60s, when Freedom House first went into operation, the Hill, you would say, was more than likely a neglected, underserved community, predominantly African-American. And it was at a time where, unfortunately, racism was at an all-time high. Blacks could not find jobs, as well as unemployment. Public housing was the thing to do, as well as poverty was widespread. And so the community itself was barely existing. We had a very tenuous, unfortunately, relationship with law enforcement, i.e. the police at that particular time. Unfortunately, that was the only option we had as far as getting to the hospital. And you look at that situation where you would have two police officers come to your residence. There was no 911 system during that time. And if they decided to come, or when they decided to get there, you were more or less at their mercy. Where two gentlemen, predominantly white, arrived in a police wagon. They placed you in the back on a canvas cot, and both officers got up front, and away you went to the emergency room. The problem with that is that if something happened to you in the back of that police wagon, example would be if you stopped breathing or your heart stopped beating, by the time you arrived at the emergency room, you were more than likely worse off during that time than when they came to your residence to pick you up. The unfortunate thing about that is you're dealing with a community that didn't have a relationship with the police, and unfortunately, your illness was kind of second nature, second priority, if you will. Unfortunately, drugs and alcohol played a prominent role. So you have individuals coming to take care of you with that stereotypical mindset, and that created an entirely different set of problems within itself. In essence, there was no such thing as emergency care outside of the hospital or the emergency room. And usually the concept was to get you to the emergency room as fast as you possibly could, and that would determine the outcome, or whether you lived or died, unfortunately. That all changed with the creation of Freedom House Ambulance Service. We essentially brought the emergency room to the patient, and we were able to prove or convince society as a whole that it's not how fast you get them to the emergency room, but what's being done before they get there. It makes the determining factor as far as their life or their outcome is concerned. I look at my story at Freedom House was somewhat unique because I was a hospital orderly at Montefiore Hospitals in that time. And if anyone, there was no such thing as nursing assistants. There were orderlies and nurse aides. And if anyone knows anything about hospitals, the orderly title was one step up from housekeeping. Okay. So we made the beds, we washed the male patients, we put Foley catheters in, we transported them back and forth to therapy or the operating room and things of that nature. So it was a rather mundane job. It was somewhat important because someone had to do that, but it was unique in itself, and you could very easily get comfortable in doing that. But unfortunately, or fortunately for me, I had a little voice in the back of my head that constantly told me I could be doing something better. But I didn't know what or how or when until one day, two Freedom House paramedics came to the hospital room that I was floor that I was working on. And it was something about these two gentlemen when they came into the room. They commanded the presence and the respect of everyone in that room just by their demeanor. They didn't necessarily yell out, "I'm here," or anything like that. It's just the way, the professionalism in which they conducted themselves really caught my eye. They were two Black gentlemen, and I kept watching them as they transferred the patient from the hospital bed to their stretcher. They were dressed in white uniforms that were neatly pressed. They both had afros and beards, which was the style at that time. And they had a portable radio on that was saying something. I had no idea what they were talking about. But it was something about these guys that struck me, that I was in awe of them. And I said, that's what I want to do. Well, initially, it started out with roughly about 24, 25 people that were put in the training program back in 1967. And during that time, unfortunately, not all of them completed the program, but the ones that did, and it was very, very intense. No one had ever done any training like this before. And time spent in the emergency room, in the operating room, in different intensive care units. They even spent time in the morgue, going over anatomy and physiology, and spending time at obstetrics at McGee Hospital, as well as classroom learning CPR. We were the very first to take CPR from the hospital out into the streets. So CPR was a big component, teaching us how to breathe for the patient. So it was a very intense training, and it was interesting because it hadn't been done before. So if you look at the overall scope of it, we essentially brought the intensive care unit from the hospital into a person's home, because we were trained to do everything that went on in the emergency room or the intensive care unit, with the exception of blood transfusions and things of that nature, we could do in a person's home. And no one had ever done that before. We were kind of restricted to serving the Hill District, and we had a contract with the city of Pittsburgh to handle the downtown business component. So you had, say, Squirrel Hill, or Point Breeze, or Homewood, or Brookline, or Beachview. Those communities had to rely solely on the police until an event occurred in Squirrel Hill, and the police arrived on the scene and didn't know what to do. A young kid struck by a Port Authority bus, and they arrived and sort of panicked because they didn't know what to do. And they asked the dispatcher to send Freedom House. And the dispatcher said, no, I can't do that because it's not their district. So if you think about that scenario itself, even in the Hill District and downtown in Oakland, there were calls that Freedom House should have been getting that we didn't get. So we had to devise a way to offset that. So what we did is we bought a police scanner, and we started monitoring the police calls, primarily in the Hill District, downtown in Oakland, that we weren't getting. And if we heard a call from a medical standpoint, go out to a police wagon or a police unit that they didn't call us on, we self-dispatched. And oftentimes we would arrive on the scene, treat the patient, transport them, and pass the police on the way to the hospital, and they were coming to the scene. We were sort of caught in the middle, and it was very difficult for us to compete in a political environment during that time. So there were calls that we would go on and the police would be there, and we would challenge them. And I'm talking about from firsthand experience on the type of care that they were administering to a particular patient. And it was nothing to get cussed out and called different names and threatened with arrest and or bodily harm. And you had to kind of concede to that realm of authority. There was no police accountability back during that time frame. So, I had to do what, this gentleman said. And so you have that tension going on, and whatever issues that the police had with the city's administration was a separate entity unto itself. But we still had to compete in that environment, and it was very, very difficult for us to do that. One of the issues at hand here is Freedom House itself, on a continuous basis, Dr. Saffer on a constant basis tried to convince the political powers to expand Freedom House into other communities or other areas of the city. And unfortunately, that was rebuked at every turn. And what happened initially was the people in the respective neighborhoods kind of challenged the mayor at that time. Hey, how dare you allow those poor people in the Hill have better medical care than we do? When I voted for you, I contributed to your campaign, I own this business, I own this home and things. You better do something. So the mayor at that time had to kind of bow to the wishes of his constituents. So instead of expanding Freedom House, he decided to start his own EMS system because he had no control over Freedom House at all. And so in an effort to start his own system, what do I do with this organization here? So Freedom House entered into an agreement with the city of Pittsburgh that they would take all of its employees, all of its equipment, and merge them into the city system. That was a written agreement on that. And the agreement spelled out what they were to do, but it left off one important fact. It said I had to take you in, but it didn't say I had to keep you. So what you have here, unfortunately, is, and please, please, please don't think that I'm a disgruntled former city employee or anything like that. I'm talking about a particular time when something happened. Okay. That was a systematic process designed to eliminate as many, if not all, of Freedom House's employees, myself included. And the goal is, if you eliminate the people that made history, you essentially eliminate that history that they made. So the goal was eliminate the history makers. So it was very successful. Roughly 75 to 85% of the people that came over from Freedom House was systematically eliminated. So we were put in a survival of the fittest type of mentality. And so it came to the point of how much of this, I don't necessarily want to call it torture, but hostile environment, for lack of a better term, can you put up with? So, you had some said, okay, you got this. I don't need to deal with this. Others were put through such regimented testing and constant shift changing and things that it made it problematic for them to stay on. I myself had to endure that same type of hostile environment because the organization, the department itself, really did not want Freedom House employees there. you're talking about a 98% white organization that came in from the suburbs into an urban environment. So unfortunately, you have stereotypical mindsets of what it's going to be like coming into this environment. So depending on what I was raised thinking, or what I read in the news, or what my parents taught me, or whatever the case is, coming into the city was the most dangerous place on earth. And that was the mindset. And so I had to deal with that. And so you're talking to someone that had all this training, was trained by Dr. Peter Saffer and Dr. Nancy Caroline, two giants in pre-hospital care, and I wasn't allowed to do anything. Fortunately for me, I went on a call with a crew that I was working with, and we went into this person's house, and there was a patient there, unconscious, not breathing, and his heart was not beating, and they didn't know what to do. They didn't have a clue. They panicked. So they looked at the person that wasn't allowed to do anything and said, "You take over." So once I started assigning duties and responsibilities, and we subsequently saved this person's life, that was great. But it had to be kept quiet because I wasn't allowed to do anything. Well, really three, and I'll try and try and keep it short since we're on the time schedule. Number one is tracheal intubation. The first person in the country to take it from the operating room and or the emergency room out into a person's home. It had never been done before. I'm the first person that had a high school education that go into an operating room and perform that procedure on a person that's being prepared for surgery. We're in a opioid epidemic now, and the drug of choice to treat that is Narcan. Everybody has it. What people don't know is that Freedom House gave Narcan back in 1972. It's not new. So there's a lot of groundbreaking things along those lines. The last thing, and what was critical important to me at the city of Pittsburgh, is the diversity of the department. I was fortunate enough to challenge the department on its hiring practices, and not without resistance, but I was able to design the very first diversity recruitment program for Pittsburgh EMS. And it was very, very successful. There are people there now that came in under that program that are still there, that have been there 30 plus years. And I'm proud of that accomplishment. And some have gone on and got pensions and benefits and things because of that project. So that's one of my crowning moments. And the last, but certainly not the least, is Pittsburgh EMS has its first African-American chief. And she's near and dear to my heart. She's someone that I hired almost 30 years ago doing my diversity recruitment program. And to see her rise from an EMT all the way up to chief of the department lets me know that all of the disappointments and the setbacks and the broken promises that we all had to overcome at Freedom House, to look at her and see where she is, lets me know that it was all worth it, because without that, she wouldn't be there. One of the concerns of mine still, and I will be working with it with the chief of EMS, is there still is a lack of diversity in my primary concern is Pittsburgh EMS, but it's across the country. So I would like Pittsburgh EMS to be the footprint on how to tackle those particular issues, because I did that same thing when I was there. And it's not complicated. You have to go out into the community in which you serve, because that's where your allies are. and expose the people within the community of this career path. And once you do that, you give them an opportunity to become something that you need in your department. And I'm a firm believer that exposure does equal opportunities. So that's really the challenge that I'm working on right now. And you know, it's going to get done. It's just a mere fact that it's going to take a lot of to do that.